In a special edition of Aki Yaoda podcast created by PAG Law, specialists in venture capital operating across the hemisphere, we have today the first part of a three-part series on Miami Tech in the early days. The first America's Venture Capital Conference, the AVCC, held in 2011, was an inflection point for Miami Tech. Unless our memory fails a bit and we forget that it was during the latter part of the 2000s where there were some pioneers working to create a tech scene in Miami. On today's podcast, we're going to speak with two of those pioneers of those early days in Miami, Brian Breslin and Auston Bunsen. Brian founded Refresh Miami in 2006, starting out as a handful of friends sharing ideas at that corner shop, Starbucks, in Miami. More than a decade later, it has grown to a community of over 10,000 strong and is for many the heart and soul of Miami Tech. He currently is the director of the Launchpad at the University of Miami, another tech initiative from the late 2000s, the beginning of the 21st century. Auston Bunsen is widely regarded as one of the most powerful voices in Miami's tech ecosystem. He created the Miami-based SuperConf, a two-day conference for web entrepreneurs, for developers, for designers that broke the mold of all tech conferences before and after in Miami, in Florida. He has founded several companies, most recently C-Blocks. In this podcast, we are going to share a lively conversation about the characters involved and the motivations behind Miami Tech in its early years. To do so, we leave with you Brian Breslin, Auston Bunsen, and the senior partner and founder of PAG Law, specialist in venture capital, that bring to you Aki Yaoda this podcast.
Auston, Brian, thank you so much for being here. The original OGs, the original gangsters in the Miami Tech ecosystem. We're going to talk about the early days. How are you guys doing?
We're doing great. Or at least I'm doing great.
Good.
I'm good as well.
Awesome. So, as I mentioned, what we're doing here, we're going to do a three-part series about the real early days with two pioneers like you all. Then we're going to talk with Irma and Damien about the AVCC, the America's Venture Capital Conference, which was the first time that at least some of the older, more gray-haired people like me, or bald people like me, sort of began to realize that there, not only there was a bit of a tech scene, that there was, a lot that could be done. And then we're going to talk with Matt and Nancy Dahlberg, Matt Hagman and Nancy Dahlberg, about the Knight Foundation and what came left. So, this is really a chance to do an oral history here and give you guys, go back 10 plus years, even 15 years, and talk about sort of the beginning of the tech scene. So I don't know if, you, Brian, you want to, kick it off talking about what brought you to start thinking about Refresh Miami, and if there was anything before Refresh.
I'm sure there were plenty of things before Refresh. I mean, you would know better because you were on Patagon like in the 90s, right?
Let me just take the giant step back. So in 96, 97, it's interesting when people began talking about Miami as a tech hub in 2010, 2011. I would raise a hand and point out, hey, Miami was a great tech hub in the late 90s. Basically, every company that raised money from Latin America, over $5 million, Latin American-based company, moved to Lincoln Road. It was awesome. It was Silicon Beach, and it was great. The issue was that, what the tides brought in, as soon as the .com crashed and, the NASDAQ went from 7,000 to, 900 or something crazy. All those companies, Patagon, Star Media, UP, AOL, Latin America, they basically all folded very quickly. And then, from my perspective, what happened when the Internet 2.0 got going in like 2009, entrepreneurs from Latin America all began moving in mass to Sao Paulo, Brazil, and not to Miami. And my view was, not knowing you guys, that Miami wasn't very well positioned to sort of take advantage of that wave. And so, I know that, I don't know if it was 2005, 2006, 2007, you guys were, getting refresh going. And actually, I still remember back then, there was this Chilean woman who I think had moved here from MIT. She was the first person I knew in Miami who was trying to like live without a car, be involved in the tech scene. And I mean, it was sort of sad because, 9 months later, she sort of gave up and moved back to Chile. But yeah, I'd love to, hear how you guys, I mean, that's sort of my story, my perspective. I'd love to hear, you guys as true locals, what were you seeing?
So I'll give a little bit of context. So I'm a born and raised Miamian, and I left for undergrad. I went to University of Virginia. I graduated in 2004. And so when I came back to Miami after spending around 6 months in 2004, searching for jobs in New York and Silicon Valley and getting garbage offers because people thought they could pay a web developer $25,000 back then.
Right.
Although not much of that has changed too much in Miami, but
Miami in Silicon Valley, you'll forget, 250. You just have
right
to add
now,
a zero. Now, exactly.
Right. But a lot of it, so I came back to Miami and then decided I was going to start a business. And then I had a little web development company that was building software and websites and stuff like that. And I had a hard time finding any other peers. I would go to like what I was assuming were the traditional business networks and business sort of outlets like the Chamber of Commerce, BNI, all these different, sort of networking opportunities. And I would sort of get blown off because I wasn't part of a big company.
Right.
Or I wasn't a known entity. And I was like 22 years old and probably looked like I was 16,
Right.
And so
you still do, buddy.
Hopefully.
Congratulations.
So basically, like, I threw it up on a website. I'd seen in a few other communities in, I think, Austin and Dallas, people had started a refresh group there. And I had emailed them and said, what do I need to do to start one here? And they're like, just do it. There's no central organization. There's nothing.
Right. And that reminds me of those first Mondays or first Tuesdays kind of meetup events.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like, so if I didn't even know about First Monday, and I guess Google, SEO and Google searches weren't as advanced back then, because apparently they were going on and off like around that time too.
Right.
Or they had just wound down because that was during the first boom. But yeah, so I just put up a simple web page saying like, who wants to meet up and talk about tech? And like 5 people showed up, like 30 people signed up for our our mailing list, like out of nowhere. And,
right.
And we showed up at a Starbucks.
And what was this, 2005?
This was like March 2006.
Wow.
So, like it was like fall 2005 when I put it up there. And then we finally got around to like herding cats and coordinating everyone by March.
And do you remember who were those 5 people?
Oh, yeah. So it was Chris and Rebecca Saylor, who were both early employees at, I think, Scrapblog. And they worked for Carlos Garcia over there. Alex Carvalho, who ended up working also at Scrapblog. Robert Murray, who was now is an iOS developer, and he's been a programmer for 20 years, I think. And then me. Yeah, so it was like 6 people total, and like Chris's wife.
So you got a 6-pack of Coronas and had a great evening.
Yeah, and so like we talked about MySpace and other things that were relevant at the time, And then everyone was like, oh, let's do this again next month. And sort of the next month, 10 people showed up. And then the next month, 15 people showed up. And it sort of cascaded like that. I kept growing, and we would just find people's offices or apartments that we could just hang out at. It was all BYOB.
Wow.
We hung out a lot at the first co-working space in Miami, Bricolage.
Wow.
Which predated the lab by 3-4 years, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
And
we had Innovate. When did Innovate Miami? Mark Billings was not too
Mark
much.
Billings was like 2010, I think. Something like
Oh,
that.
okay. So,
Maybe 2009. And then it sort of like it wasn't Refresh wasn't professionalized in any shape or form until around 2012. And that was when Knight Foundation came in and said, and Matt Hagman came in and said, hey, let's give you some money. And like Peter Martinez and Davide Di Chilo and a few others had just been volunteering with me to like put this together. And Alex de Carvalho was also very active in it the first three or 4 years in helping organize events and stuff like that. But
so Auston, I want to follow up with you. So I remember, I think I'll get the date, but I think it was 2011. I published this op-ed piece in the Miami Herald where I said, hey, it's time to, start our engines, get organized, and, get Miami Tech going. And it was great. This was when there was this, for the younger people, there was this platform, Facebook, that was relevant. And Auston just like blew me up on Facebook saying, you're an asshole. There is a whole tech scene. Pay attention to what's going on in your backyard. So yeah, tell us a little bit about what you were doing as Brian was getting going with Refresh in 2006.
Yeah, so I was actually living in Germany in 2006, but I came back shortly after that, and I started working at a software company as a developer.
Were you making more than 25 grand?
35.
Dude, you were balling.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was working in Broward, and then I ended up leaving that company. The CEO ended up going to jail.
That's a very South Florida story.
Yes, yeah. So I went to another company, and at that company, I ended up needing to like find a design agency. And so through Googling, I was like, looking for South Florida web design agencies, and I found Brian. I doubt Brian even remembers this phone call, but
he's shaking his head no.
Yeah, I was like, oh, hey, I work for this company, rushmypassport.com. We're looking for someone to handle the design portion of a RFP. I saw your site; it looks pretty cool. Da, 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 da. This had to be maybe like 2008.
Right.
And I was like, cool, yeah, that's great. I'll get back to you. I never got back to him, but I did see that. But I did see that he was running this thing called Refresh, and I went, and like I think the first one that I went to was pretty small. I think there might have been like 40 people, 30 people, something like that. And I was like, oh wow, this is pretty cool. And then through Refresh, I found out about this other thing called Future of Web Apps. So this guy named Ryan Carson was running a conference in Miami called Future of Web Apps, and he would do a bar camp, which is like a unconference, sort of like free, anyone can speak, that sort of thing.
Okay.
And he would do the unconference before his real conference, where it's like paid, people are on stage, etc. Sort of.
But sorry, I'm interested in this concept of the unconference. It's almost like open mic. It's like open mic before the conference. Like
yeah, so essentially you can think of it like you walk in on day 1, minute 1, and there's a blank table of slots and rooms where you can just be like, I'm going to speak on this topic in this room at this time.
Okay, cool.
And it actually comes from O'Reilly. Used to have this conference called Friends of O'Reilly, FOO camp.
Okay.
And in programming, there's like a sort of colloquialism, FOO bar. So people were like, "Oh, we're not invited to the FOO camp. Well, we're going to start a bar camp." And they took the same sort of principle as Refresh. They put the format online. They said, here's all the materials you need to organize a bar camp. And people started doing them. And so this bar camp in particular was organized by, back then, Refresh co-organizer Alex DiCarvalho. And so, yeah, going through that, I was like, whoa, this is awesome, right? Like, no offense, Brian, but like going to going to bar camp, like a bunch of people that came from everywhere were at bar camp. So like,
And was your guys' sense in 2006, 7, 8, when, the early days, I mean, this is, 3, 4, 5 years before the Knight Foundation really began to, put dollars behind this. Did you feel like, I've had that feeling sometimes where, I'm like a pioneer and I'm just like either taking arrows, doing work. I don't know if this is going to, lead anywhere. Did you feel like, hey, there was that, product market fit that, people just seemed hungry for what you guys were doing and building? Or did it feel like, you were a small crew of eccentrics who, were sort of doing this?
Brian, I'll go first. So for me, I wasn't organizing before 2011. I was just consuming, and as a consumer, it was awesome. Like it was just a bunch of people just hanging out, doing whatever.
Right. And Brian, I mean, what was your sense? Was it growing? Did you feel like you were tapping into something, or?
So, yeah, I think so. I think, look, there was a sort of this underlying current that everyone was looking for their tribe,
Right.
And like, so we've all been in Miami for decades at this point, the three of us, and like, as a self-described nerd, growing up in Miami, being a nerd is not a nerd-friendly place,
right?
And so, or a geek or whatever you want to call it, And so, I think there was a ton of this sort of atmosphere of like in the community at the time of like build for the sake of building. There wasn't this whole like this is pre-lean startup. This is pre. Y Combinator was still like barely known outside of the Valley or outside of Cambridge because that's where
right, exactly,
the beginning, right? And so, and the idea of like building startups and stuff like that was still, I think it was early in the culture for Miami. Like the idea, I think there was also this like still people shell shocked from the first wave, where you were building something to get rich, right?
Right.
And now this was like, okay, I'm going to build something because it's solving a problem that I have, or it's making my life easier, or I want to learn a new technology. And so there was a lot of that sort of, I don't know, that subculture of just creation, and that's usually followed by a wave of commercialism, for lack of a better word.
Right.
So.
And did you feel like, so you start, Refresh, you have 5 people, then it grows to like 30, 40. Does it sort of, stay there just because, or do you feel like, are things, sort of building momentum, or you weren't really interested in that? You were sort of feeling like, hey, I want to, build this community, build this tribe, let like-minded people like Auston have something they can connect into, but we're not really interested at this point in scaling it.
So I don't think I ever went into it with the sort of the initial mindset of I'm going to turn this into a big commercial endeavor or turn this into a huge community. I mean, I do like to sort of brag that I spent over $5,000 on pizza in those few years. But I looked at that, I was like, that was like my marketing budget that I didn't spend for my business,
Right.
But I think I didn't have any real sort of growth expectations. I just thought it was neat or it was cool. Like it was sort of like a pat on my back if there was more people this month than the last month, and we didn't really hit an inflection point until around 2012. Like we had about 2,500 people in our mailing list, I think in early 2012 before Knight came along. And then within that same year, we grew to 4,000,
Right.
And because you had Knight coming in and sort of connecting everybody and saying like, oh, you guys should be communicating. Like we benefited a ton from the community, the lab, and you guys were building at the lab,
Right.
because we finally had a central hub to sort of bring everyone to. That was the default place, and before that, everything was also scattershot. And if you didn't know where to go, you didn't know where to go,
Yeah, and my sense at the time was people were also building sort of walled gardens. UM had the launch pad and Incubate Miami. They weren't places you could just sort of turn up and bring your pizza and a couple beers and your dog and just get to work. Like, you sort of needed to be invited in. So Auston, in 2008, as you're looking for programmers, et cetera, did you feel that there was sort of a critical mass of sort of like-minded people interested in tech? Or did you, or did you feel like, when you met, Brian and connected with Refresh, it was like, oh my God, okay, I found this tribe, but it's, we're a very small band down here and there aren't that many more of us.
So, my first handful of Refresh experiences were, they were all good, right? The only thing that was interesting was like the fluctuation of attendees, right? Like back then it was like one week there would be like, or 1 month there would be like 30 or 40 people. And then the next one you're at a racetrack for horses and there's like 5 people in a very loud bar. And then the next month there's, 200 people in an auditorium at UM.
Right.
And so, Brian and Peter and all of the team were just trying to do their best to just find venues back then.
Right. And was your sense that the people that were there, was it, because, one of the issues has always been, even today in the tech scene, that, you can have a lot of service providers, people,
like lawyers.
Who aren't, like lawyers, accountants, some lawyers do a few things, to try to improve the lot for the community. Like, but yeah, one of the things, for instance, at the lab, with the co-working, we really tried to be selective in just trying to say that, hey, non-service provider, we want people who are thought leaders, change makers, not just people, not just offering space for, a real estate agent who just went off on his or her own. So, what was your sense in terms of the people that you were bringing to those events, Brian? In the early days?
So I think in the early days, there was less service providers. There's a few here and there. I think, remember the context though, is also like that same time period was like the boom in real estate in Miami.
Right.
And so like everybody and your cousin now had a real estate license because they'd gone and taken that 1 week course.
Right.
So you couldn't like avoid sort of any people being involved in the real estate industry, which also I think had a little bit of detrimental effect on Miami because from a tech perspective, because you weren't able to get funding for anything tech related between 2006 and 2009. All that money went straight into condos because it was easier for an investor to say, like, here's a condo I can actually, touch and live in if like the shit hits the fan versus, a piece of software that, is ethereal, right?
And did you guys have connections? Because you had New World Angels. I'm not sure exactly when they were formed, but they were formed.
They've been since around the 80s.
Yeah. Okay. So they've been around. You did have UM's Launchpad about the same time. Incubate Miami, you said, came a little later. Mm-hmm. You mentioned a co-working space, what was the name of that? I need to track that down. Briko.
Briko.
Oh, okay.
Was that the one that was in Midtown 4, Brian?
Eventually. At first, they were in that building that, I guess, Wynwood Arts building. That was their first location, across the street from where Panther is. Or
wait, no, they were in Wynwood Lofts first.
Maybe. Whatever that building is called. It's like on 23rd or something like that. And then they moved into Midtown 4 right when Midtown was like getting built.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And Fructoid was like 2 floors above them.
Yeah, I remember that.
Wow. And did you feel that, there was some synergy, that people were these sort of early bits of sort of infrastructure? Because I mean, when we began thinking about the lab and AGP Miami Angels and doing some conferences, it was really, hey, we need to help build some infrastructure to pull people together. I mean, we were aware of some of these initiatives, but they seemed like they weren't connected. I mean, what was your sense? Were you in touch with people who were doing other things in the tech ecosystem, or not so much?
We were. I think the challenge though was like Miami was very siloed at the time, like you were saying,
Right.
And also Miami has the disadvantage of being very broad geographically, and so all the people who worked at like the big corporate employers, the Citrixes of the world, all the cruise lines and things like that, those were very much 9-to-5 jobs for those people,
Right.
And they kept to their own little clusters or bubbles, and so it was hard, I think, to get collaboration across these different silos. Like we worked with Launchpad for a while. They would host our events and things like that. We partnered with Mark Billings on some events too. And it's ironically, like now I'm the director of the Launchpad 12 years later.
That's full circle, right?
Yeah. But I think from a healthy ecosystem standpoint, though, a lot of other communities or cities benefit from sort of this. The big companies feed the small companies, right?
Right.
Like the small companies provide services or solve problems or do things like that for the big companies and or the local government and things like that. And we never really got that, so that's an area where I wish we had a better guidance, and a lot of this was, look, we're all figuring this out on our own, and we're also doing this as a volunteer initiative,
Right.
So it's hard to say like, oh, let's go build all these partnerships when like I was doing this like 5 to 7 p.m. after I finished working all day on whatever client work and revenue generation I needed to do,
And Auston, what was your sense as more initially as a sort of consumer of the ecosystem that was Brian, or the tribe that Brian was trying to build? I mean, did you feel like, hey, Refresh was cool and the other stuff wasn't, or, Refresh was helpful and the other initiatives weren't that helpful? I mean, what was your sense, and how did you perceive what was going on?
I went to a lot of tech events back then. Like I would go to like at least one a week. And I was living between Broward and Miami Beach. So I went to this thing called Hack Intel in Fort Lauderdale. And that was like pure nerds, like very, very technical people. That it was literally a batch of 5 people at this co-working space in Fort Lauderdale called the White Table Foundation, WTF. And
WTF, that's amazing.
and so the range at the Refresh events is always like there's a handful of nerds, there's a handful of founders, there's a handful of business people, and there's a handful of service providers. Right. So I've met some really quality people through Refresh. Some of the people that stand out to me are Davide Di Chilo. He's now a product director at Pinterest. Ben Block, who was working at Nike and then now works at Strava. So the people were always really awesome. I don't think I've ever met anybody at Refresh that I didn't like. So that's maybe hopefully contextual.
Right. And in terms of where you were drawing people from, Brian, was it sort of, now, Miami's a little bit more dense, with the Brickell sort of core and Edgewater, and, you feel there's a bit more density. I mean, I remember when it was announced that Endeavor was coming to Miami, and at the time I was on the Endeavor Global Advisory Board and on the Knight Foundation Community Board. And what I found shocking was, like, of 20 people who reached out to me about Endeavor coming to Miami, no one was asking me to really help. Everyone was just focused on where they were going to put their office, because they thought it would, real estate developers or whatever, community leader, sort of pushing, no, it should be in Wynwood, Coral Gables, downtown, whatever. And so, yeah, where did you sort of draw people from? And did that give you a sense of, the hunger locally for a tech community being built?
So, I mean, in the beginning, we moved around a lot. Like, we did a bunch of things on Miami Beach until like I got tired of driving to the beach because I lived in Coconut Grove. And
Okay.
so a lot of the things ended up being within 20-minute drive of where I lived because I didn't care to drive further. And Miami traffic is garbage, right?
Right.
So a lot of times early on, like a few of the companies that we would host us were in Coral Gables. Like Carlos Garcia's Scraplog had a big office and they were in Coral Gables in the same building where ESPN Latin America, Disney, Yahoo, Apple, all were in that same sort of block. But we ended up eventually moving towards Wynwood because it was more central. It was still early, so people like it wasn't overpriced and things like that.
Right.
And it was easy for people to just get to. It wasn't the sort of hype beast that it is now.
Right.
And so that ended up being sort of like our central nexus, I guess, for a long time. And Wynwood also, like for a long period, had this same spirit that you got that Tony Hsieh was trying to push in downtown Las Vegas, where you would just walk
Right.
from Panther to the lab and you'd bump into 3 people that you knew who worked at some random startup, and you found out later that startup was in a warehouse around the corner from where you just ran into them.
Well, it's so funny you say that because I remember getting involved with Matt at the lab at the Knight Foundation, and he said, where should we spend our money? And I said, no, you should just the Panther and Wynwood. The Knight Foundation should somehow buy or, rent a space right next door because that was sort of the meeting place. It was really
I used
incredible.
to have office hours there and spend.
Is that right?
Yeah, and spend like 6 hours every Tuesday and Thursday there, just like spending
next
way
to
too much
that
on coffee.
poet.
Yeah,
Next to the poet who would like have the old school typewriter
Mhm.
and would write a poem.
There was
for you.
also
Yep.
Tom Ordonez would hold office hours at Panther for like teaching people how to code. Yeah.
Really? Wow. And so, Austin, you mentioned you were living in Broward and Miami Beach at the time, and you mentioned the the White Table Foundation up in Broward. Did you see any connections at that point? Because one of the things that I feel even to this day we don't do nearly enough of is, when you look at the dollars invested in tech, they're listed as South Florida, which is Palm Beach County, Broward, and Miami-Dade. And last year we had like $2.4 billion worth of, some sort of, broadly defined tech investing. So it's, huge. It's the 7th largest, sort of tech center in terms of dollars invested in the US. But since we're sort of balkanized, it feels even today that, Palm Beach is sort of its own thing, Broward sort of its own thing, and Dade's sort of Miami-Dade sort of its own thing. We don't get that feeling of that we're really in this tech hub because, we're spread out over 100 miles. What was your sense? I mean, back then, was there some connectivity, or was whatever was going on in Broward was completely different and distinct? And
no way. Absolutely. It was all connected. So, Brian did and the rest of the team at Refresh did a great job of like always trying to include Broward in those early days. They would have, at one point they did a thing at Gulfstream Park. That was the that was the 5 people in a loud bar.
Is that right? That's amazing.
But they've reached as far as Palm Beach, as far as I know. That's actually where I was when I first got involved in the Miami tech scene. I worked at a company in Palm Beach.
Wow.
But yeah, I think they. Go ahead.
We ran a Refresh Fort Lauderdale for like 3 years, but at some point I couldn't justify driving up there. For when only 50 people would show up.
Right.
And in Miami we had 150, and then after that, for a while, I think between 2012 and 14, we had partnered with some company to sponsor a shuttle bus that would bring people from Palm Beach County all the way down to the event at the lab.
Really?
Yeah. And so 20, 30 people would jump on this bus and they'd get to network for an hour before showing up at Refresh. But then people were complaining that it was a 5-hour commitment to come to an event.
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, but you don't have to drive, and you got free food and booze and all this stuff. And you get to meet people.
Right. And this was before Tinder. So, I mean,
Right.
you got.
I forgot about Refresh Fort Lauderdale. Like you had one at CarMax. I remember that.
Yeah. CarMax or AutoNation or whatever it is.
That's what it is.
It's like based there, hosted us. And Willie Morris, who was the one who was running the White Table Foundation, was our like co-host up there. And he moved away. So.
Yeah, and you've mentioned some name, Carlos Garcia a couple times. This White Table Foundation, Mark Billings. I mean, who are some of the obviously Susan Amat was there at Launchpad. Who are some of the other people? Just to give sort of a shout out to, or initiatives that might have come and gone that people might have forgotten about.
I got plenty. I'll go first.
Go.
Mike Greenberg from Hack Intel. That was one of my favorites. Bring it back. Hack.
And what was Hack Intel?
Yeah, Hack Intel was a once a month meeting where you got to present or see someone present on something they hacked in the last month.
Cool.
I remember him talking about Bitcoin in 2010, and I was like, oh, this is a crazy person.
He was crazy,
I remember that too. That was a bummer. I was there for that.
If I had just given him $100.
I know, yeah. Or you could have done what I did, which was buy and then sell at 500. Sell it all, just thinking you were just getting out at the top. So who else? Who else, Austin? Who else?
Definitely Willie Morris. Willie Morris and the White Table Foundation. Who else? The people at Bureau. Bureau was super early. Definitely Tom Lackner from Destructoid /.co. Let's see, who else? Wilfredo and Danny.
Oh yeah. No, the version, not even 1.0 of the lab. I remember, meeting with them in the Zebra building in Wynwood with, their grand total of 500 square feet. And just as Brian, as you said, just creating community, creating a tribe and getting shit done every day. It was amazing.
My last one is Alex Carvalho for Barcamp.
And what was Barcamp?
Is this a trick? Yeah.
I'm just fucking with you. So Brian, well, who else do you think we got to put in the Hall of Fame, in the early Hall of Fame as the part of the original gangster crew?
Oh, I mean, look, you got to definitely give a shout out to Carlos Garcia and all the people who were working at Scraplog early on. Like a lot of those early employees have gone on and started other companies that have sold multiple times. But the sad fact was they ended up getting dragged out to San Francisco because their VCs wanted them to move out there. And
right.
So we lost 20, 30 people in one fell swoop. But yeah, other people like Ali and Eduardo Enriquez were the founders of Bricolage back then. And they did that sort of as a labor of love before there was a financial model for co-working.
Oh, we did. I mean, at the lab, it isn't like we tweaked that model, the financial model, so much either. So
right.
It's an uphill battle.
I mean, there were some other people like Dan Rubin was a local. He was volunteer at a lot of our local events. Robert Murray, Alex DC definitely was critical to keeping a lot of things going back then. Who else? I feel like I'd be doing a disservice. Yeah, Mark Billings. Honestly, he was ahead of the curve. Because his background was real estate, and he realized that he could turn this building that he had in downtown into an incubator. Who else? I don't know.
Well, as you noodle on that, you'll never remember everyone. I know it's a pop quiz, but as you guys, we have about 5 minutes left. As you guys think now, where the tech scene is, and where you'd like to see it go. I know both of you have over the years expressed some interest about things maybe not being as authentic or tied to sort of the real Miami as it could be. I mean, what's sort of your hope in terms of where the tech scene locally evolves. And, what do you think the next generation of Brian Breslins and Auston Bunsens, should be thinking about building in order to sort of keep the tradition going?
Yeah, so
I'll let Austin go first.
Due to coronavirus, there's a whole lot of interest in moving to a place you actually like to live. And so I actually convinced one person who actually convinced another person. So this is one of the people that was on the early team at Soylent, that drinkable meal thing. So he is in the process. He's like here right now, living here from San Francisco. He brought a friend. On Twitter, Chamath Palihapitiya is endorsing Miami as his go-to city if it wasn't San Francisco. So there's a lot of interest in moving to Miami now. So my message to future Austins or current Austins is be friendly, make friends, invite people, be helpful to anyone that wants to move to Miami. It can make a world of difference for everybody here.
Yeah, I totally agree. It takes a village. I mean, that is one thing I point out to people who are thinking about moving here is it's a pretty easy city to tap into because there's relatively few people who grew up down here. Most people are sort of transplants or immigrants, and it's pretty easy to connect. And what's your sense, Brian, in terms of the next stage, the next natural development of the tech scene down here?
So I'm with Austin. I think we're going to see a sort of a uptick in transplants who are working remote. Like as much as I'd love everyone to be working for local companies and building local tech, I think we're going to see a lot more capital, at least tax dollars, coming into Miami via people working remote for a New York or San Francisco-based company, and making those dollars from their local, their local levels. I just hope that they take the initiative and reach out to the local community to get involved and get active and not stay isolated in their South Beach Ocean View condos or whatever it is that they move to.
Right. Well, probably Edgewater, but yeah, no.
Yeah.
I totally agree. So, what are the sort of local, if that's sort of your audience here at the last, couple minutes, what are you, refresh? I mean, what are you guys doing that's exciting? What are you guys excited about in terms of, sort of local either meetup groups or local initiatives that should say, hey, make sure, if you're here, try to connect with these people?
So we're working on sort of like a welcome committee, welcome package type thing, so people coming into the community can easily hit the ground running. I mean, all our in-person events are obviously on the back burner for now, until we have a viable solution for how to do that. But we're also going to start doing some more virtual stuff, and but I think the key in the beginning is just helping people identify other people, and also helping connect people, job seekers, with recruiters or hiring partners and stuff like that to jumpstart the economy,
And Austin, you never have any opinions.
What do I think? What do you think? Well, first of all, I want to shout out this amazing conference called SuperConf happening. So if you're watching, there's a one-day summit where you have people that are founders, designers, developers from Silicon Valley, New York, all over the world coming to speak, more than likely in October, pending some stuff. But what is awesome? Everything is awesome. I actually don't think that there's a lot of negative things other than rain about Miami and Miami tech right now.
No, I feel the same way. And I mean, going to what you said, I've met, some, I'm not going to name drop, but, sort of top 50 venture people who've, with private planes, so they could be literally anywhere they want to be. And they chose to ride out the quarantine here in South Florida. And I know, they're, thinking, they're renting homes now, and they're definitely thinking about buying a home or a cluster of homes. So, Yeah, no, I think we're gonna see just a huge amount of interest of people, as you said, looking for better quality of life and realizing they can work sort of from anywhere. I do agree with you, Brian, 100% that sort of the risk is going to be that we used to always have these thing where people would sort of parachute into Miami and leave. I mean, I remember the first Endeavor, before Endeavor moved down here, the first Endeavor summit, they parachuted into the Four Seasons and newly built Four Seasons on Brickell Key. And, 72 hours later, they had left. And other than me and like one other person, no one from Miami even, went to the conference or knew that it had been here. So I think, going to what you and Auston said, we definitely have to, figure out a way to get those people not just living in their bubble and, enjoying their nice view and running around with their, multi-million or billionaire friends, but really connect locally. And so any final words, any words of wisdom for the people who are, sort of doing God's work, trying to build something here in the tropics? Given you guys started that journey 15 plus years ago?
I think the one mistake that a lot of new community organizers or new people who want to get involved is they don't reach out to the people who are already doing stuff and then build on top of what they've got. Everyone always wants to recreate the wheel from scratch. And then
right.
That's just a vicious cycle where nothing gets done, And so I'd say
you end up with a lot of small wheels.
Yeah.
No, that's such a good point. I mean, you see it in the not-for-profit, right? Where every, rich person wants to create their new charity. And it's like, hey, there's, 500,000 charities that probably you could find one you could leverage and build off of. So Auston, what any
reach out.
final thoughts?
My email is
people who are just getting started,
ab@bits,
trying to build
BITS, or bricks, BRICKS.com. I want to meet you.
Remember SuperConf.
Yes.
And remember SuperConf. Motherfuckers, SuperConf. Look for it in October. Guys, it's been quite a long, strange trip. It's been awesome working with you guys for the last 10 years. I wish I'd been, at some of those early refresh events, but this is awesome, man. I love what you guys have built and done and connected, and just know you've, dejaste una gran huella, and we're all super appreciative. So thanks again, guys.
Yeah, thank you for doing this.
No, absolutely. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Este fue otro programa de Aquí y Ahora, auspiciado por PAG Law, especialista en Venture Capital. Hasta pronto.